Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure. We're at a special time this week because we have a very special guest, Brenda Bence, who is joining us from Singapore, where it's already tomorrow. So, Grace Under Pressure is it's an interview show, and we pose questions to thought leaders and doers like Brenda, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a greater understanding of our world, especially as we create a new normal. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, the commitment we feel toward others. Grace for me is the generosity we show, respect we give, compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader, especially in our challenging times, it requires the ability to act for others and mobilize everyone around us. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, John. Thank you. It's such a joy to connect with you.
Well, yes, it is for me. And it's wonderful because you're in Singapore, and so we're going to talk about that. But you began your life in Nebraska, I think. I know that's where you're from. And you've been abroad for many, many, many years. Before you went overseas, you got your MBA from Harvard Business School. Then you worked for P&G, Procter & Gamble, and then Bristol Myers Squibb. And then you left the corporate world and created your own empire, your own company, DBA International. And you do business with 30 different countries, in 30 different countries. And you're highly, highly recognized. You've written 11 books. You're ranked number 10 among top executive coaches and the #1 branding expert by Global Gurus. You're also a Thinkers 50 top leading global coach. Way cool. I think you bring a unique perspective to coaching because you've been in the seat. You have been a senior executive. And you also are widely published. In addition to writing 11 books, your work appears everywhere. And not only that, you play mahjong. So, which is a game I know nothing about, except at my little golf club. There's a club people who do play it. So anyway, it's fun. So welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, John. It really is a joy to connect with you. Thanks.
Well, you have a unique global perspective, and that's really why I wanted to talk to you today. So we are gripped by the global pandemic and economic crisis, and then here in the States, a social injustice. So what are you hearing from, say, your colleagues around the world? What are you picking up?
Well, it depends. I think the answer is it depends. I was just on the line yesterday with Australia, which is kind of divided. You've got certain spaces where it's complete lockdown, and you've got others where it's just no issues whatsoever. And so it's being managed very differently. I think this is the reflection of what's happening in the world today.
Sure.
I look at global leaders leading multiple countries. I was online with a leader who manages 75 countries, and he has had to decentralize because the truth is you can't have a general strategy for 75 countries all experiencing something different. You've heard the phrase, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. We're all in different boats. And so you really have to be flexible, agile. You have to decide what you have to decentralize and let people in the local environments manage effectively for what's happening there.
Since I have you here, I want to drill down a little bit. So what's the business mood in Asia?
Well, it depends as well. So you've got China where, 6 months ago, I was coaching in China in February when things were really going into lockdown. And it was really a challenge back then and everything shut down. Now, yesterday, I was talking to someone and frankly, it's not pretty much back to normal, but it's very, very close. Domestic flights are like 60% back up to where they used to be. So you have a lot of activity there. Whereas in certain other countries and parts of Asia, they're still very much in lockdown. And then you have the countries where it was going really well, and then it went back to not going well again. And then, so it's really switching back and forth. It is so fluid. I think as a leader, this is a brilliant time to practice agile leadership because we have to be flexible.
Great. And how about Europe?
So Europe is mixed as well. I'm just on the line with a client in Germany a couple of days ago, and he's excited to get back into the office, and they're heading back there next week. So, it just depends. Each country's different. In Italy is still, having some challenges, but getting better as well. So it's so fluid. Mm-hmm.
Are you observing where, say, in China or in Germany, and your executive has gone back into the office, are staff coming or others coming back to the office, or are they working virtually? What's happening?
Well, that's a good question. So I'll give you an example of a client here in Singapore. Singapore is allowing essential workers to go back into the office. So what that means is roughly 11% of one very large organization that I work with, 11% of their staff and their key leaders are in the office. The rest are all at home. I know another large bank, for example, who from now till the end of the year, everyone's working from home. Everyone. That's just what they've put in place. So it's so individual, and each leader has to decide how to manage this. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Now, you also work in the States, as if Asia and Europe weren't a big enough pasture for you. You're coming back home. What do executives want to know, knowing your background? What do they ask you about things abroad?
Well, I think it's more about how do you lead internationally? How do you lead multiple different geographies, cultures, amongst different languages? There's just so much diversity in managing and leading globally. How do you do that? How do you approach that? Right. And by the way, different leadership styles work well in different parts of the world, and you have to keep that in mind too. And so again, I think if there's one word for this decade, it's going to be agile. Be flexible. Yeah.
So how are you defining agile? How do we, what makes a company, or what makes a leader agile?
Well, I think you mentioned mahjong, so I'll play with that a little bit, John. You mentioned mahjong. The reason I love that game so much is it's a beautiful combination of strategy and chance. Strategy and chance. And there are times in the middle of the game where you may just completely change your strategy. You have a plan, you think it's going to work, you start into it, and as the tiles roll, suddenly it's not working anymore. And you've got to learn to adapt. And I think that is what I mean by agile. It's that recognizing, being completely tapped in and aware of what's going on, and say, okay, you know what? We have to change strategy. And I am seeing this all around the world right now. People are recognizing they have to change strategy. Mm-hmm.
That's such a wonderful metaphor. And so everything you say is almost self-evident. I don't mean to be facetious, but it's that moment of knowing, hey, it's not working. So what do you counsel?
Well, first of all, the number one place to find out is not me. It's actually asking people on the front line. One of the things that I'm really encouraging leaders to do right now, this is a perfect time to rewrite the rules. It's as if the swamp has been drained and the rocks are showing. And it's time to look at those rocks and say, okay, who's closest to those rocks on a day-to-day basis, and how can I leverage that knowledge? And ask, go deep into the organization. What do you see as our challenges? What could we do better? There's never been a better time to rewrite the rules, and right now and rewrite them with possibility, not rewrite them from a base of fear, we have to, but from a place of what could we do better? And you know what the other thing is, those rocks, we're revealing our biggest weaknesses.
Sure.
We're revealing our biggest weaknesses. Look at them as a gift, and then get the people who are involved in it day in and day out to come back and say, okay, here's what I would do differently. It doesn't mean you have to do what they recommend, but if you start to see patterns and trends, that's a gift. And so look at that way, and recognize that those people on the front line are the ones who know the business best in that regard.
I love you saying that, because it is something that I've often counseled senior executives to do. And what's the challenge of doing that, reaching down into the organization virtually? Any insights you might have?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I like to say, John, is get over the virtual mental barrier, because people have just we've got to get used to this, because whether we like it or not, This is the new reality. I don't think this is going away anytime soon. Some of my clients say to me, oh, I just can't wait to get back into the office and have face-to-face conversations again. And I say, that's true. Can't wait to get on a plane and go visit clients. Yeah, that's true. But it may be months. It may be years. We don't know. So get comfortable with this right now and look at it not just as the downsides. A lot of people say, oh, the downsides of virtual communication, the downsides. I say, look at the brilliance. Here, you and I are having a chat. I'm in Singapore. You're in the United States. What a brilliant thing this can be. We can save money on flights. We can save money on all the different things that would be involved. Our time is minimized. So there's a lot of benefits to the virtual, and I think that's what's really key. So get over the virtual mental barrier is the first thing I say, and don't plan on being back in the office anytime soon. That's the other new norm.
It's wise counsel, because I agree with you. I'm really thinking 2022, to be honest with you. Who knows? I hope I'm wrong. But I also like the virtue of you turning a virtual as a virtue, as we say, because I think it's an opportunity for honest and open conversations. And it's a kind of leveling, would it not to say? Would you not agree? I mean, you see your senior leader in his, I just make this metaphor or image, you see him in his bathrobe or a t-shirt, whatever. So that's kind of, we're all down on the same level there.
Well, there's that. There's two things happening. Number one, we're getting to know each other personally so much more. You know, you're in your home, I'm in my home. We're having connections. We can learn about each other through that way. The other thing is, you know, what used to happen with a CEO who had to do a town hall. He or she would get on a plane, they would fly to a location, they'd get off, they'd be tired, they have to stand up in front of a large group, they'd have to speak, they'd hit maybe at best 500 people, maybe a few thousand. Now, I just talked to a gentleman in Malaysia, CEO in Malaysia 2 weeks ago. He's doing a 12,000 person virtual town hall. This is the beauty of having this. Right. You can connect people all around his many different, I think 6 different countries. He's connecting with 6 different countries just like that. What a beautiful thing.
Wonderful. Now, are you seeing, it's one thing to get one's message out there to a broad audience, of course. What about the what's coming back in? What are you advising to, as you know, go and listen to your folks? Any idea, any suggestions on that? How to become a better listener? Not some better listener, but better attuned to tuning into what people are saying.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be open doors. The first thing I'm encouraging people to do is find ways to bring in those open doors, to open up. Is it digitally? Are you going to do some kind of a chat room, internet, whatever? You've got to be able to have people coming in. But the most important part, John, and I know you know this, you have to ask powerful questions. You have to ask great questions. What kind of questions are you asking your team right now? But here's the other thing. Don't make it about tasks. We're all focused on tasks right now, getting the work done. How do we get work done remotely? What I'm encouraging is focus on the relationships first. Because there's a lot of people hurting. People throughout the organizations are hurting. And when they're in a place of uncertainty, when they're in a place of discomfort, the productivity has a chance of dropping dramatically. So let them know that you care. Ask the questions about them. How are they handling this? How's their family? What concerns do they have? Listen, listen, listen. It's one of the most important things and most important signs of respect that we can have. So
without question. And I think that also bodes well for our new normal. I think we're going to get used to this kind of, call it intimacy in a proper sense, a more connectedness. And so in a way, we're building a new foundation. We're beginning to build the building blocks for our new foundation. So there's something else, are you sensing, and I think you alluded to it, you talked about the hurt that we are feeling, that many are feeling. It's also a sense of loss, is there not?
I think there is, but I think what we need to do is be realistic. You know, I think, John, you and I've talked about the Stockdale paradox. You're familiar with that, right? And I think it's worth repeating. You know, James Stockdale was a naval officer in the Vietnam War, and he was there for 7 years. He was beaten, tortured. It was dreadful. But what he learned from observing what happened, who died and who survived, right? And who died first? The blind pessimists, those who were, woe is me, this is horrible, we're never going to get out. Those were the prisoners of war that died first. Secondly was the blind optimists, those who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, we're going to be out by the end of the year, we're going to be out by summer. They died second. But the realists, those were the people who lived the longest and finally escaped, because they were doing two things, right? Brutal honesty. They were being brutally honest, telling the truth as it was, but then offering a narrative of hope. And I think if we can just embody that today, that for leadership, that's key. What is the brutal honesty? The truth is, in COVID, we don't know when this is going to, you said it too just now, John, we don't know when this is going to end. We have no idea. And that's the brutal truth. But then allowing it a narrative of hope to say, but we have overcome this kind of thing for centuries. Humans are resilient. We're going to make it through this too. So it's finding that balance, I think, is foundational to great effective communication today. Yeah.
So glad you quoted Admiral Stockwell. I have quoted him so much. I've written, quoted him in print and many times in presentations. There's something else that I learned from him. As you probably know, when he was released, he went to Stanford and studied Stoic philosophy. And he also wrote books. He wrote a book on military ethics. And there's a wonderful quote that he has that I put in the foreword of one of my books. And he talks about, and it's germane to our topic now, because he said, leaders gain power by giving it away, by sharing. The more they share, the more it comes back to us. Would you not agree that's a great metaphor for now for our leaders throughout the organization?
Love it, John. And I'll tell you why. It comes back to what I just mentioned. When you ask people questions and you listen to them, you are actually giving them power. And what we need right now is empowerment, because people are feeling really lost. And that productivity is going to drop dramatically. So when you can empower people, just even to be heard, that's all people really want. Maybe you won't take their suggestions, maybe you will, but the ability just to be heard and to know that someone cares, we woefully underestimate the power of that sometimes.
Without question. And there's something else that you were talking about, if I can remember my train of thought, about it's the sharing the power and connecting with one another. We create this connectedness, which holds us to, it builds, what does it build? Trust.
Trust and power. And here's what's beautiful. No matter, one of the things about leadership globally that I learned really early on as I've worked in my international career these past 20 some years, is that certain things are universal. And yes, there's different ways. There's the how can be different. The how of how we interact in Asia versus interacting in Europe versus interacting in South America may be different. But the whats are often very consistent, meaning the trust, meaning it's still about relationships, no matter how you build it. So it's about the trust, it's about the integrity. And when you can demonstrate that globally, that's the what. Then the how needs to be a little nuanced sometimes, just to make sure that it lands appropriately with the right audience. But you're hitting it. I think trust is foundational.
Right.
And trust in our leaders of countries too.
Without question. And then something endemic, and we haven't used the word, but we've talked about it and you've alluded to it. And we're in a time of great ambiguity. So do you have anything you share with the leaders that you coach about I call it squaring the circle, or creating a degree of certainty? Is there such a thing?
Yes. So one of the number one thing I say, and by the way, I've been running a lot of webinars with large corporations. And the first question I like to ask is, what's one word to describe what you've been feeling in these past few weeks and months? And the number one word is what you just said, uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty. It's without a doubt, it's the number one word that comes through. So how do you deal with uncertainty? And what I encourage people to do is watch where you're focusing. So where are you focusing today? Where are people focusing? Are we focusing on COVID, on how many cases came up yesterday, on how many deaths there were? What are we focusing on? Or are we focusing on what we can control? because you cannot control COVID. If we could, we'd be long gone by now, but you can't do that. But what can you control? And what you can control is, what am I doing? How am I acting? How am I reacting? How do I look? How do I sound? What am I thinking? All of those are things that you can control every single day. So I say focus on what you can control, not what you cannot control. And that sounds so elementary, but once you just shift that mindset, it changes everything.
Absolutely. I get one of my favorite quotes from our fellow Midwesterner, John Wooden, says, "Don't let what you cannot do interfere with what you can do." And that was always applied to, influence. We think, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. But I think it's become a good saying for our own times. And it summarizes just what you said. Okay, we cannot control everything around us, but here's what we can do.
Yeah. And actually, if you look at the list of what you cannot control and what you can control, I think you realize the list of what you can control far outweighs in terms of number what you cannot control.
How so? Can you give me?
Think about it. Think about it. I can control how I think, what I eat, how much sleep I get. I can control. I mean, you go on and on and on. I can control how I react with this person. I can control when I turn my computer on, when I don't turn my computer on. I can control when I go to my office, when I don't go to my office. If you start to walk through your day, you realize you're far more in control of things than you realize. But we allow those seemingly big, uncontrollable things to take more precedent in their mind sometimes. And I think we just focus, yeah.
I think what you've just given us, Brenda, is a lesson in self-empowerment.
Well, I like to call it self-leadership, right? Because, we always talk about leadership of leadership of others, but the truth is the first person we need to lead is ourselves, right?
Without question. And, actually, if I can, my very first book was called Personal Leadership, and it's about you.
There you go. Others. I remember that.
Unless you lead yourself. We're in this crazy time. So as you look around in the different cultures in which you work and stuff, are you drawing any conclusions about, as leaders, what makes us human?
What makes us human? Well, I would say the number one thing is probably vulnerability.
Okay.
Vulnerability. Leaders are, I'll tell you something interesting. I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of men are growing beards. And there's a lot of research about what beards are about.
I can't grow one, but I understand.
Right, if you wanted to. But growing a beard, and there's some research that shows that that's actually covering up the fact that there's some fear and that they're feeling vulnerable. I think that's really fascinating because I think we'd all be growing beards right now, if we could, because there's a lot of vulnerability happening. So I think there's a lot of that. But I also think and I think unfortunately go with that vulnerability goes a sense of fear. But I will also say that I think one of our most human capabilities is one we often overlook, especially at times of crisis, which is this what I call the joy of possibility, looking at the potentiality of what could come out of this. It's tremendous. When in the history of humankind have we had a global pause like we're having right now? It's incredible. And we can look at this opportunity as one of, oh my gosh, it's going so badly. Or you can say, wow, how am I going to use this time to rebrand, to regrow, to re-strategize, to pivot, to adjust? How can I use this as potentiality for where I can go, not where I have been? And that's what I think if leaders and individuals alike can just look at that and say, how do I take this extraordinary opportunity, which I doubt will come again in our lifetime, and use it to my good? I think
what's so powerful about that, Brenda, is, everything is uncertain, obviously. And so making a major change, a pivot, there's a degree of uncertainty in that. But what the heck? Everything is uncertain. So
that's what I said. The swamp has been drained. Yeah. You might as well pull up the rocks and start and refill up the swamp. And what a beautiful opportunity. And again, to reach down into organizations and to connect with people at all levels and say, let's do this together. I think this is a brilliant time for leadership to inspire and to engage. So I'm actually kind of excited to see where this all comes out. Yeah.
There are great potentials. And I'm glad you used the word inspire, because curiously, and I've been fascinated with the topic of inspiration for quite some time. And there was actually a study from a decade or so ago by McKinsey said that actually individual or employees were looking to their leaders for inspiration. And it almost struck me as really, because my own shtick was when we say, where does inspiration come from? I would always say, well, it comes from motivational speakers.
We like that, yes.
Of course it doesn't. But it comes from our work, and we're looking to our leaders for inspiration. Do you counsel them on that?
Well, yeah. So I have many leaders say, one of my goals, I want to be inspiring. And the first question I ask is, are you inspired? Because the truth is, if you look at the origin of the word inspiration, it's from in spirit, right? And where is that? That's not out here. That's in here. Are you yourself inspired? Because if you're not, don't even try to inspire others. You need to make sure that you're inspired first. Once you are inspired, you've seen this. You've seen the reason motivational speakers do so well often is because they're inspired. They're feeling inspired by what they say. And so the inspiration of that is a feeling, it's the old Maya Angelou quote, people won't remember what you did. They won't remember what you said. They will remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely.
Inspiration comes from being inspired. When you are inspired yourself, when you are really grounded and you're connected and you're it's just flowing naturally. Trust me, people will feel that. And that's coaching people to do that before town halls, making sure that they're with those 12,000 people. Are you truly inspired yourself? Because if you are, it will all go smoothly and people will really feel that.
Right. And I think an avenue into that feeling inspiration, and I've seen it in the good leaders that I've worked with or whom I admire, is they're they have a passion for what they do, but they're inspired by the people around them, by their employees. And that's always a good thing to tap into because it's real.
Well, and as you said, John, they're inspired. And when you can ask them, see, right now, I don't know if that's happening because I think they're a little uncertain, they're a little unproductive, they're concerned. But if you can ask the right questions, that's right, questions, we know this as coaches, questions are so powerful because when you can ask the right question to get people into that mind of possibility, into that mind of what could be, instead of focusing on what's going wrong, and you magnify that times the however many hundreds or tens of thousands of people you have in your organization, that's when things really take off. And that's why I say right now is a perfect time to do this because the swamp's been drained. It's time.
I'm enjoying our conversation. One of the reasons is because you have such an energy and an optimism, and it's contagious. And I know that this sense of optimism is so critical to executives in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Yeah. But again, you can't get that from someone else. You have to get it from yourself. And so the key thing I talk to leaders about right now is what's motivating you. Mm-hmm. Because if the motivation, I've got to get my numbers, I've just got to get my numbers. If I don't hit my number, that's a fear-based motivation.
Sure.
What can motivate you in a different way? And it's as you mentioned, talk about grace under pressure. It's the intangibles, right? But the intangibles are what are going to get us through this.
Right.
Because the tangibles are all changing, but the intangibles don't change. And that's what I would say is focus on those intangibles because that's what you can control. And that's going to really lead you where you want to go.
Great. And since you raised the topic of grace, do you have a story or an example of grace that you want to share with us?
Oh, wow. Grace.
Grace that you're seeing around us. And grace is that positive, there's many ways to define it, but that ability to connect with others, to share moments of kindness, intended kindness, the connectedness that we feel toward one another. So,
yeah. Well, I think recently I was working with an executive and, it's a beautiful job. Don't we have a beautiful job, John, working with executives and helping them to transform and see things in a new way? And someone who's been challenged with relationships in the past demonstrated to me last week that he was making that shift. And he talked about how excited he was because he actually asked a powerful question and sat back and just listened. And that sounds so simple, but for a lot of people, that's not. And he said the connection he felt was instantaneous. And it was that moment of shift. And I think that's what we're all after. It's that connection. And a lot of it's just ask and listen as opposed to talk, talk, talk and do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would say that's a moment of grace at work, that ability to allow yourself to be more connected, which that question did, and just listen for a moment. And that for a busy executive who feels that need to be in control, stepping back, that's grace at work, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love that. Yeah.
So, Brenda, we're coming to the end here. How can people find you?
Oh, yeah. Well, come visit my site or visit my site, brendabence.com, or actually LinkedIn, active followership there and post quite regularly there. Lots of social media, but feel free to come to my site and connect. I love staying connected with people all around the world. You know, one of the beauties of living overseas as long as I have is that we have connections all around the world. And I love these sites like LinkedIn that allow us to connect with people all around the world at all times. So I would love to connect. Yeah.
Great. Well, good. And if any questions, you can always Google. So
that's true. And I have a YouTube channel that I post a lot of stuff on too. So
terrific. So thank you for being our guest today. And I appreciate all that you're doing for executives around the world. You're helping to make it a better place. So with that, we'll close out.
You too, John. Thank you so much.